Hello Year 8, I hope that you're all well. Today we're going to read Chapter 4 of 5 Children and It, but first of all we are going to start by recapping what happened in Chapter 3. So we started off the chapter with the children all being very tired and very disappointed that their last wish went so horribly wrong. They are trying to discuss what is the best thing to do with making any new wishes, and their little baby brother, the lamb, is causing absolute havoc. And he eventually causes a bowl full of goldfish to be pulled over into their laps. So they decide that they will only wish for useful wishes and not be selfish. And they decide to wish this time for actual money that they can use rather than just gold. But they're finding their baby brother more and more irritating, and Robert makes they're all finding him very frustrating, and Robert says that he wishes that somebody else wanted his brother, and then he realizes how bad he is. In that time, the lamb is causing so much trouble. He's digging in the sand, he's throwing sand in his siblings' eyes. They use ginger beer to try and wash the sand out of his eyes. He's causing an absolute nuisance of him, or making an absolute nuisance of himself. So yes, Robert wishes that everyone or anyone else wanted the lamb so that they can get away from him. And the sand fairy then is behind them and hears the wish, and they ask if he could not grant that wish. And he chastises them, criticizes them for being ungrateful, and says that the wish is granted and that's the end of it. So they head home feeling very sorry for themselves, and Robert feels very guilty about what he said about his baby brother. And along the way, they find that everyone wants the lamb, their baby brother. So there's a very fancy lady in a carriage who takes the baby, and they have to chase after the carriage. Then when they stop, the coachman and the footman are arguing, and they have a fight over the lamb. The children manage to steal him back, but as they're walking home again, there's a young boy and a young girl, and they're desperate to have the lamb, but the children manage to keep him away from everyone by hiding in the bushes. Next, they come along and find a camp of gypsies who very much say that they want the lamb as well. And the children try to bide their time and say that they'll stay there with the lamb until sunset, knowing that by then the wish will wear off and then they can take the lamb home happily. So it takes a while. They're there for a few hours. They have dinner. And then eventually the gypsies start to get a bit cross with them and want them to leave. And just before then, just after then, the wish then wears off. And with the lamb screaming, the gypsies are very happy for the children to take him home. But it's a bit of a lesson for the children, really. They realise that they do love their sibling and they don't want to give him away to anyone else. So again, it's kind of a case of the grass is not always greener. So it's an interesting chapter. But we're going to move on now to chapter 4. Just going to switch my screen. Okay. So chapter 4 is called Wings. I'm going to get started, and as always, you can read along with me or just listen. It's entirely up to you. So we're going to read for about 20 minutes, and then I'd like you to read on to the end of the chapter once I've finished reading. Okay, Wings. The next day was very wet, too wet to go out and far too wet to think of disturbing a sand fairy so sensitive to water that he still, after thousands of years, felt the pain of once having had his left whisker wetted. It was a long day, and it was not till the afternoon that all the children suddenly decided to write letters to their mother. It was Robert who had the misfortune to upset the ink pot, an unusually deep and full one, straight into that part of Anthea's desk where she had long pretended that an arrangement of gum and cardboard, painted with Indian ink, was a secret drawer. Let me just move the page. It was not exactly Robert's fault. It was only his misfortune that he chanced to be lifting the ink across the desk just at the moment when Anthea had got it open. and that same moment should have been the one chosen by the lamb to get under the desk, to get under the table and break his squeaking bird. There was a sharp, convenient wire inside the bird, and of course the lamb ran the wire into Robert's leg at once, and so, without anyone's meaning to, the secret drawer was flooded with ink. At the same time, a stream was poured over Anthea's half-finished letter, so that her letter was something like this. Darling Mother, I hope you are quite well, and I hope Granny is better. The other day we... Then came a flood of ink, and at the bottom these words in pencil. It was not me upset the ink, but it took such a time clearing up, so no more as it is post-time. From your loving daughter, Anthea. Robert's letter had not even begun. He had been drawing a ship on the blotting paper while he was trying to think of what to say, and of course, after the ink was upset, he had to help Anthea to clean out her desk, and he promised to make her another secret drawer better than the other. And she said, well, make it now. So it was post-time, and his letter wasn't done, and the secret drawer wasn't done either. Cyril wrote a long letter, very fast, and then went to set a trap for slugs that he had read about in the Homemade Gardener, and when it was post-time, the letter could not be found, and it never was found. Perhaps the slugs ate it. Jane's letter was the only one that went. She meant to tell her mother all about the Psammead. In fact, they had all meant to do this, but she spent so long thinking how to spell the word that there was no time to tell the story properly, and it is useless to tell a story unless you can do it properly, so she had to be contented with this. My dear mother dear, we are all as good as we can, like you told us to, and the lamb has a little cold, but Martha says it is nothing, only he upset the goldfish into himself yesterday morning, when we were up at the sand pit the other day. We went round by the Safeway where carts go round, and we found a... Half an hour went by before Jane felt quite sure they could none of them spell Psammead. And they could not find it in the dictionary either, though they looked. Then Jane hastily finished her letter. We found a strange thing, but it is nearly post-time, so no more at present from your little girl, Jane. P.S. If you could have a wish come true, what would you have? Then the postman was heard blowing his horn, and Robert rushed out in the rain to stop his cart and give him the letter. And that was how it happened that, though all the children meant to tell their mother about the sand fairy, somehow or other she never got to know. There were other reasons why she never got to know, but these come later. The next day Uncle Richard came and took them all to Maidstone in a wagonette, all except the lamb. Uncle Richard was the very best kind of uncle. He bought them toys at Maidstone. He took them into a shop and let them choose exactly what they wanted, without any restrictions about price and no nonsense about things being instructive. It is very wise to let children choose exactly what they like, because they are very foolish and inexperienced, and sometimes they will choose a really instructive thing without meaning to. This happened to Robert, who chose at the last moment, and in a great hurry, a box with pictures on it of winged bulls with men's heads and winged men with eagles' heads. He thought there would be animals inside the same. He thought there would be animals inside, the same as on the box. When he got it home, it was a Sunday puzzle about ancient Nineveh. The others chose in haste and were happy at leisure. Cyril had a model engine, and the girls had 2 dolls, as well as a china tea set with forget-me-nots on it, to be between them. The boys between them was bow and arrows. That means a gift or a present that they can share between them. Then Uncle Richard took them on the beautiful Medway in a boat, and they all had tea at a beautiful pastry cook's, and when they reached home it was far too late to have any wishes that day. They did not tell Uncle Richard anything about the Psammead. I do not know why, and they do not know why, but I dare say you can guess. The day after Uncle Richard had behaved so handsomely was a very hot day indeed. The people who decide what the weather is to be, and put its orders down for it in the newspapers every morning, said afterwards that it was the hottest day there had been for years. They had ordered it to be warmer, some showers, and warmer it certainly was. In fact, it was so busy being warmer that it had no time to attend to the order about showers, so there weren't any. Have you ever been up at 5 o'clock on a fine summer morning? It is very beautiful. The sunlight is pinky and yellowy, and all the grass and trees are covered with dew diamonds. And all the shadows go the opposite way to the way they do in the evening, which is very interesting and makes you feel as though you were in a new other world. Anthea woke at 5. She had made herself wake, and I must tell you how it is done, even if it keeps you waiting for the story to go on. You get into bed at night and lie down quite flat on your little back, with your hands straight down by your sides. Then you say, I must wake at 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or whatever the time is that you want. And as you say it, you push your chin down onto your chest and then bang your head on the pillow. And you do this as many times as there are ones in the time you want to wake up at. It is quite an easy sum. Of course, everything depends on your really wanting to get up at 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9. If you don't really want to, it's all of no use. But if you do, well, try it and see. Of course, in this, as in doing Latin proses or getting into mischief, practice makes perfect. Anthea was quite perfect. At the very moment when she opened her eyes, she heard the black and gold clock down in the dining room strike 11, so she knew it was 3 minutes to 5. The black and gold clock always struck wrong, but it was all right when you knew what it meant. It was like a person talking a foreign language. If you know the language, it is just as easy to understand as English, and Anthea knew the clock language. She was very sleepy, but she jumped out of bed and put her face and hands into a basin of cold water. This is a fairy charm that prevents your wanting to get back into bed again. Then she dressed and folded up her nightgown. She did not tumble it together by the sleeves, but folded it by the seams from the hem. And that will show you the kind of well-brought-up little girl that she was. Then she took her shoes in her hand and crept softly down the stairs. She opened the dining room window and climbed out. It would have been just as easy to go out by the door, but the window was more romantic and less likely to be noticed by Martha. I will always get up at 5, she said to herself. It was quite too awfully pretty for anything. Her heart was beating very fast, for she was carrying out a plan quite her own. She could not be sure that it was a good plan, but she was quite sure that it would not be any better if she were to tell the others about it, and she had a feeling that, right or wrong, she would rather go through with it alone. She put on her shoes under the iron veranda on the red and yellow shining tiles, and then she ran straight to the sandpit and found the Psammead's place and dug it out. It was very cross indeed. It's too bad, it said, fluffing up its fur like pigeons do their feathers at Christmas time. The weather's Arctic, it's the middle of the night. I'm so sorry, said Anthea gently, and she took off her white pinafore and covered the sand fairy up with it, all but its head, its bat's ears, and its eyes that were like a snail's eyes. Thank you, it said. That's better. What's the wish this morning? I don't know, said she. That's just it. You see, we've been very unlucky so far. I wanted to talk to you about it, but would you mind not giving me any wishes till after breakfast? It's so hard to talk to anyone if they jump out at you with wishes you don't really want. You shouldn't say you wish for things if you don't wish for them. In the old days, people almost always knew whether it was Megatherium or Ichthyosaurus they really wanted for dinner. I'll try not, said Anthea, but I do wish. Look out, said the Psammead in a warning voice, and it began to blow itself out. Oh, this isn't a magic wish, it's just, I should be so glad if you did not swell yourself out and nearly burst, to give me anything just now. Wait till the others are here. Well, well, it said indulgently, but it shivered. Would you, asked Anthea kindly, would you like to come and sit on my lap? You'd be warmer, and I could turn the skirt of my frock up around you. I'd be very careful. Anthea had never expected that it would, but it did. Thank you, it said. You really are rather thoughtful. It crept onto her lap and snuggled down, and she put her arms round it with a rather frightened gentleness. gentleness. "Now then," it said. "Well then," said Anthea, "everything we have wished for has turned out rather horrid. I wish you would advise us. You are so old. You must be very wise." "I was always generous, from a child," said the Sand Fairy. "I've spent the whole of my waking hours in giving. But one thing I won't give, that's advice." "You see," Anthea went on, "it's such a wonderful thing, such a splendid, glorious chance. It's so good and kind and dear of you to give us our wishes, and it seems such a pity it should all be wasted just because we are too silly to know what to wish for." Anthea hadn't meant to say that, and she had not wanted to say it before the others. It's one thing to say you're silly, and quite another to say that other people are. "Child," said the Sand Fairy sleepily, "I can only advise you to think before you speak." "But I thought you never gave advice." "That piece doesn't count," it said. "You'll never take it. Besides, it's not original. It's in all the copybooks. But won't you just say if you think wings would be a silly wish?" "Wings," it said. "I should think you might do worse. Only take care you aren't flying high at sunset. There was a little Ninevite boy I heard of once. He was one of King Sennacherib's sons, and a traveller bought him a Psammead. He used to keep it in a box of sand on the palace terrace. It was a dreadful degradation for one of us, of course. Still, the boy was the Assyrian king's son. And one day he wished for wings and got them, but he forgot that they would turn into stone at sunset, and when they did he fell slap onto one of the winged lions at the top of his father's great staircase. And what with his stone wings and the lion's stone wings, well, it's not a pretty story. But I believe the boy enjoyed himself very much till then." "Tell me," said Anthea, "why don't our wishes turn into stone now? Why do they just vanish?" Or Tomps or Mers," said the creature. "Is that the Ninevite language?" asked Anthea, who had learned no foreign language at school except French. "What I mean is," the Psammead went on, "that in the old days people wished for good solid everyday gifts, mammoths and pterodactyls and things, and those could be turned into stone as easy as not. But people wish such high-flying, fanciful things nowadays. How are you going to turn being beautiful as the day, or being wanted by everybody, into stone? You see, it can't be done. And it would never do to have two rules, so they simply vanish. If being beautiful as the day could be turned into stone, it would last an awfully long time, you know, much longer than you would. Just look at the Greek statues. It's just as well as it is. Goodbye, I am so sleepy." It jumped off her lap, dug frantically, and vanished. Anthea was late for breakfast. It was Robert who quietly poured a spoonful of treacle down the lamb's frock so that he had to be taken away and washed thoroughly directly after breakfast. And it was, of course, a very naughty thing to do, yet it served two purposes. It delighted the lamb, who loved above all things to be completely sticky, and it engaged Martha's attention so that the others could slip away to the sandpit without the lamb. They did it, and in the lane Anthea, breathless from the scurry of that slipping, panted out, "I want to propose we take turns to wish. Only nobody's to have a wish if the others don't think it's a nice wish. Do you agree?" "Who's to have the first wish?" asked Robert cautiously. "Me, if you don't mind," said Anthea apologetically, "and I've thought about it, and it's wings." There was a silence. The others rather wanted to find fault, but it was hard, because the word wings raised a flutter of joyous excitement in every breast. "Not so dusty," said Cyril generously, and Robert added, "Really, Panther, you're not quite such a fool as you look." Jane said, "I think it would be perfectly lovely. It's like a bright dream of delirium." They found the Sand Fairy easily. Anthea said, "I wish we all had beautiful wings to fly with." The Sand Fairy blew himself out, and the next moment each child felt a funny feeling, half heaviness and half lightness, on its shoulders. The Psammead put its head on one side and turned its snail's eyes from one to the other. "Not so dusty," it said dreamily. But really, Robert, you're not quite such an angel as you look. Robert almost blushed. The wings were very big, and more beautiful than you can possibly imagine, for they were soft and smooth, and every feather lay neatly in its place. And the feathers were of the most lovely mixed, changing colours, like the rainbow, or iridescent glass, or the beautiful scum that sometimes floats on water that is not at all nice to drink. Oh, but can we fly? Jane said, standing anxiously, first on one foot and then on the other. Look out, said Cyril, you're treading on my wing. Does it hurt? Asked Anthea with interest. But no one answered, for Robert had spread his wings and jumped up, and now he was slowly rising in the air. He looked very awkward in his knickerbocker suit, his boots in particular hung helplessly, and seemed much larger than when he was standing in them. But the others cared but little how he looked, or how they looked, for that matter, for now they all spread out their wings and rose in the air. Of course, you all know what flying feels like, because everyone has dreamed about flying, and it seems so beautifully easy. Only you can never remember how you did it, and as a rule you have to do it without wings in your dreams, which is more clever and uncommon, but not so easy to remember the rule for. Now the 4 children rose, flapping from the ground, and you can't think how good the air felt running against their faces. Their wings were tremendously wide when they were spread out, and they had to fly quite a long way apart so as not to get in each other's way. But little things like this are easily learned. All the words in the English dictionary and in the Greek lexicon as well are, I find, of no use at all to tell you exactly what it feels like to be flying. So I will not try, but I will say that to look down on the fields and woods, instead of along at them, is something like looking at a beautiful live map, where, instead of silly colours on paper, you have real moving sunny woods and green fields laid out one after the other. As Cyril said, and I can't think where he got hold of such a strange expression, it does you a fair treat. It was most wonderful, and more like real magic than any wish the children had had yet. They flapped and flew and sailed on their great rainbow wings, between green earth and blue sky, and they flew right over Rochester, and then swerved round towards Maidstone, and presently they all began to feel extremely hungry. Curiously enough, this happened when they were flying rather low, and just as they were crossing an orchard where some early plums shone red and ripe. They paused on their wings. I cannot explain to you how this is done, but it is something like treading water when you are swimming, and hawks do it extremely well. Yes, I dare say, said Cyril, though no one had spoken, but stealing is stealing even if you've got wings. Do you really think so? Said Jane briskly. If you've got wings, you're a bird, and no one minds birds breaking the commandments. At least they may mind, but the birds always do it, and no one scolds them or sends them to prison. It was not so easy to perch on a plum tree as you might think, because the rainbow wings were so very large, but somehow they all managed to do it, and the plums were certainly very sweet and juicy. Fortunately, it was not till they had quite as many plums as were good for them, that they saw a stout man, who looked exactly as though he owned the plum trees, come hurrying through the orchard grate with a thick stick, and with one accord they disentangled their wings from the plum-laden branches and began to fly. The man stopped short with his mouth open, for he had seen the boughs of trees moving and twitching, and he had said to himself, the young varmint's at it again, and he had come out at once, for the lads of the village had taught him in past seasons that plums want looking after. But when he saw the rainbow wings flutter up out of the plum tree, he felt that he must have gone quite mad, and did not like the feeling at all. And when Anthea looked down and saw his mouth go slowly open and stay so, and his face become green and mauve in patches, she called out, Don't be frightened, and felt hastily in her pocket for a 3-penny bit with a hole in it, which she had meant to hang on a ribbon round her neck for luck. She hovered round the unfortunate plum owner and said, We have had some of your plums. We thought it wasn't stealing, but now I'm not so sure. So here's some money to pay for them. She swooped down towards the terror-stricken grower of plums, and slipped the coin into the pocket of his jacket, and in a few flaps she had rejoined the others. The farmer sat down on the grass suddenly and heavily. "Well, I'm blessed," he said. "This here is what they call delusions, I suppose, but this here threepenny," he had pulled it out and bitten it, "that's real enough. Well, from this day forth I'll be a better man. It's the kind of thing to sober a chap for life, this is. I'm glad it was only wings, though. I'd rather see birds, as aren't there and couldn't be, even if they pretend to talk, than some things as I could name." He got up slowly and heavily and went indoors, and he was so nice to his wife that day that she felt quite happy and said to herself, "Law, whatever have a come to the man," and smartened herself up and put a blue ribbon bow at the place where her collar fastened on, and looked so pretty that he was kinder than ever. So perhaps the winged children really did do one good thing that day. If so, it was the only one, for really there is nothing like wings for getting you into trouble. But on the other hand, if you are in trouble, there is nothing like wings for getting you out of it. This was the case in the matter of the fierce dog who sprang out at them when they folded up their wings as small as possible and were going up to a farm door to ask for a crust of bread and cheese, for in spite of the plums they were soon just as hungry as ever again. Now there is no doubt whatever that, if the four had been ordinary wingless children, that black and fierce dog would have had a good bite out of the brown-stockinged leg of Robert, who was the nearest. But at first growl there was a flutter of wings, and the dog was left to strain at his chain and stand on his hind legs, as if he were trying to fly too. They tried several other farms, but at those where there were no dogs, the people were far too frightened to do anything but scream. And at last, when it was nearly 4 o'clock, their wings were getting miserably stiff and tired. They alighted on a church tower and held a council of war. "We can't possibly fly all the way home without dinner or tea," said Robert with desperate decision. "And nobody will give us dinner, or even lunch, let alone tea," said Cyril. "Perhaps the clergyman here might," suggested Anthea. "He must know all about angels." Okay, so I would like you now to carry on reading from page 70 up until the end of the chapter. I hope that you enjoy the rest of the story, and there will be a task for you to complete on Google Classroom and Satchel 1. And I will see you next week for the next chapter. Have a lovely week, Year 8. Bye.